I knew something was off the moment I saw the white Lexus parked crooked in my driveway again. It wasn't mine. It was hers, Cheryl, HOA president, 50-something, bleach blonde bob, and a voice that sounded like a smoke alarm on full volume. She'd parked there before just to drop off notices, but this time she wasn't alone. A guy in a blazer and loafers stood beside her, thumbing through a manila folder. Realtor. Great. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee in hand, wearing my usual weekend shirt that read, "This is my lawn mowing shirt," even though I had zero plans to mow anything. "Morning," I said flatly. "You lost." Cheryl didn't even flinch. "Trevor Langley, we've reviewed your property and determined it no longer meets the neighborhood standards. This is Mr. Carl Dunham. He's here to begin the listing process." "Listing process?" I raised an eyebrow. "For my house." She crossed her arms like she was proud of herself. "You've had unapproved modifications. Your garage door is painted the wrong shade of beige, and you've been warned about your truck too many times." The truck, a beat-up '98 Silverado, was legally parked in my driveway. I'd gotten it from my dad. HOA hated it because it didn't match the aesthetic. Carl cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been contacted to assist with the voluntary sale process per HOA directive. If you cooperate, we can find you a buyer quickly." "You dragged a realtor to my house without notice," I said, jaw tightening. "For a house I own outright." Cheryl smiled like she'd just won a game of Monopoly. "Trevor, we're protecting property values. You're not a good fit for this community anymore." I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked straight back inside. They thought they had me. But they didn't know what I'd put up in my front window the night before. A little project I'd been working on ever since Cheryl started her nonsense a few months back. I'd had enough of the surprise visits, the fake violation letters, and the mysterious HOA fines with no dates or signatures. So I did what any sane person would do. I built a trap. And today was the day it caught something. I walked back out, coffee in one hand, remote in the other. I pressed the button. The motor whirred as the sign rolled down from behind the living room window, big, bold letters on a bright yellow background. "Smile, Cheryl. You're being recorded. Unlawful eviction attempts are a felony. See Penal Code 518. Underneath it, in smaller letters, "Footage sent to local news, city council, and my attorney." Carl's face drained of color so fast he looked like he was about to pass out. Cheryl blinked, then tried to laugh. This is a joke. You trespassed," I said calmly. "You brought a realtor to force a sale based on fake violations. That's coercion. I've got every HOA meeting recorded, every letter copied, every voicemail transcribed, and guess what? I've got a friend on the city's housing committee." Carl stepped back like the porch was suddenly on fire. I was told this was a voluntary assessment. I didn't know you were used," I said. "But don't worry, you're not the one who's going to jail." Cheryl's lips twitched. She looked like she wanted to scream but couldn't figure out what to say, so I helped her out. "Get off my property," I said, "before you make it worse." Cheryl didn't move. Her heels were planted on my concrete like she owned it. Carl, on the other hand, had already taken a few cautious steps backward toward the Lexus, holding that manila folder like it might explode. I didn't break eye contact with her. I didn't have to. The sign in my window was doing most of the talking now. "You think you're clever," she finally said, her tone brittle as old drywall. "Putting up signs, bluffing with legal terms. You'll regret this kind of behavior when the board meets next week." "You're holding a clipboard full of unsigned citations, Cheryl," I said, stepping off the porch slowly. "And you brought a third party into a private property dispute without due process. That's not only a violation of the HOA charter, it's bordering on extortion. So if you want to talk about behavior, maybe let's start there." She flinched, just slightly. Not enough for most people to catch, but I'd been watching her long enough to notice when she slipped. Carl cleared his throat again, clearly desperate to escape. "I think I've made a mistake by coming here. I wasn't informed this was contested." "You weren't," I replied. "You were lied to." I suggest you take your name off whatever documents she handed you before it becomes part of a deposition." He didn't say anything else. Just turned and walked briskly to his car, peeling out of the driveway without looking back. Cheryl watched him leave, then turned toward me again, voice lower now. "You don't get to threaten the board and walk away clean. You don't know who you're dealing with." "You're right," I said. "I didn't, but I do now. That's why I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office last month. About your misuse of funds regarding the landscaping contract." Her face shifted, just a flicker. But it was enough to confirm what I suspected. "Funny thing," I continued. "The contractor you hired, my cousin used to work for him. Said he never saw a dime from the HOA, even though you submitted 3 separate payments to the board's treasury marked completed. That's embezzlement, Cheryl, and it's not a civil issue anymore." "You can't prove." "I don't have to," I cut in. "The auditor from the county is already scheduled to meet with the treasurer on Thursday, and I made sure to include the invoice numbers. So they'll be asking you the same thing you just asked me. Are you really a good fit for this community?" She turned to go, her shoes clicking across the concrete with sharp, angry steps. But as she reached her car, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "You think you've won something, but all you've done is make enemies." "No," I corrected. "I made neighbors." Her expression twisted, and then she drove off without another word. I waited until the dust settled literally and then walked back inside. I didn't bother taking the sign down. I wanted it there. People needed to see it, especially the ones who had been too scared to speak up. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, 2 people I'd barely spoken to in the 3 years I'd lived on this street showed up at my door. The first was Joel, a retired firefighter who lived 3 houses down and mostly kept to himself. "She did the same thing to me 3 years ago," he said. "Told me my backyard shed was unauthorized construction because it was painted red instead of brown. I ended up tearing it down just to shut her up." The second was Alina, a nurse who worked evening shifts at the hospital. She'd gotten fined twice for noise violations, both on nights she wasn't even home. "They never showed any evidence," she said. "Just a piece of paper with a dollar amount. I paid it the first time, but the second one, I knew something was off." I invited them in, and we started comparing notes. By sundown, we had a list of over a dozen violations issued to different residents, none of which had dates, signatures, or photographs attached. All bore the same initials at the bottom, CL. I spent the next few days collecting statements. I didn't go door to door, I didn't have to. Word had gotten out about what happened in my driveway, and people started coming to me, quietly, carefully, like they were afraid the walls might have ears. One woman, an elementary school teacher named Karen, brought over a typed sheet with the subject line, "Unauthorized pet." According to the letter, she'd been fined for owning a dog that exceeded the weight limit. The thing is, she didn't have a dog, she'd never had one. But the letter had a photo attached, a blurry image of a German shepherd standing in someone else's yard. "They just needed a reason to fine me," she said. "I didn't join the landscaping committee when they asked. I told them I didn't have time." Then this showed up 2 weeks later. I added it to the growing file. By the end of the week, I had 23 separate complaints. 4 of them involved money that had been paid directly to a maintenance fund that didn't appear anywhere in the official HOA budget. 2 residents had copies of checks made out to Cheryl's personal LLC, something called Golden Valley Property Solutions. That was the nail in the coffin. I took the whole packet and drove to the county attorney's office, not a local police station. This was past that. I'd done my homework. HOA corruption, once it crosses into financial abuse and false fines, becomes a matter of racketeering, fraud, possibly even conspiracy. The assistant district attorney, a woman named Monica Gilbreth, listened carefully as I laid it all out. She didn't blink when I handed her the folder. "This isn't the first time we've heard her name," she said. "We've been monitoring a few HOA boards with similar complaints. But this," she tapped the folder, "this is the most complete documentation we've seen." I left the office with the weight of the neighborhood on my shoulders, but for the first time in months it felt like something was shifting, like the screws were finally turning in the right direction. 2 days later, Cheryl didn't show up to the HOA board meeting. Instead, a quiet man in a gray suit stood at the front of the room and announced that, effective immediately, Cheryl Langley was suspended from her position pending an investigation. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. Half the room already knew, the other half would know soon enough. I didn't say anything. I just sat in the back row, arms crossed, watching as people shifted in their seats, whispering to one another. The board tried to carry on like it was business as usual, but the mood had changed. No one interrupted, no one barked orders. For the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, the air felt breathable. After the meeting, Joel clapped me on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "You planning on running for the board?" "Not a chance," I replied. "I just want a quiet driveway and a truck that nobody bothers," he laughed. "Well, you earned that much." As I walked home, a few neighbors waved, some nodded. One even handed me a plate of cookies, no explanation needed. I didn't need a title, I didn't want one, but I knew one thing for sure. This neighborhood wasn't hers anymore, it was ours. By the following week, the neighborhood buzz had turned into a quiet storm. People didn't gossip openly. Not yet. But eyes lingered longer. Sidewalk conversations dropped to whispers whenever a board member passed. Lawn chairs began migrating closer to the street, like everyone wanted a front row seat to whatever came next. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Cheryl being suspended was just the first loose thread. The sweater hadn't unraveled, but it was starting to itch. On Thursday morning, the county investigator returned my call. "Trevor Langley, that's me. This is Investigator Hall from the District Attorney's Office. I've reviewed the financial documents you submitted. We have probable cause to believe the HOA president and possibly other board members have diverted funds into private accounts. I'd like to ask your permission to include your video footage as part of the evidence package." "You've got it," I said, "and I've got more." Since filing the report, 3 additional residents gave me bank statements and receipts showing HOA dues being withdrawn twice in a single month. One of them doesn't even pay online. He didn't pause. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement under oath? You tell me where and when. Tomorrow. Municipal building, 3rd floor, 9 in the morning." I hung up and leaned back on my couch. Sunlight caught the edge of the yellow sign still hanging in my window. I hadn't taken it down. Not out of defiance, out of habit. Like a porch light left on to warn off the wolves, that night a new face rang my doorbell. She was tall, maybe early 40s, wearing a blue blouse and holding a slim leather folder. Her expression was calm but cautious. "I'm Layla Hargrove," she said. "I'm the interim HOA president." I didn't invite her in, she didn't ask. "I wanted to speak with you before the next meeting," she continued. "I've read every violation Cheryl issued in the last 6 months. Most of them are invalid, some might be criminal. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to clean house." "Then you're starting in the right place," I said. "What do you want from me?" "Your cooperation, and possibly your help." I crossed my arms. "Define help." "There's no record of any vote authorizing the landscaping contracts. The treasurer claims Cheryl handled all financial decisions solo. But 2 board members signed off on quarterly budgets that show the payments. I've asked both to provide written explanations. One quit this morning. The other won't return my calls." She thumbed open her folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. "This is a list of names, residents who were fined, warned, or intimidated into silence. You've spoken to most of them already, haven't you?" I didn't nod. I didn't have to. "I want to form an independent audit committee," she said. 3 residents, not board members, will have access to HOA records, bank statements, and meeting minutes. If we find evidence of criminal behavior, we hand it over to the DA. If not, we publish everything for the neighborhood to review. Full transparency. And you want me on it. I've seen the footage, I've read the complaint. You're the reason this isn't buried. I studied her face, no flinching, no rehearsed lines, just someone trying to dig out of a trench someone else built. "I'll do it," I said, "but one condition. You open every file, no redactions, no missing pages." She nodded once. "Agreed." The next morning, I gave my sworn statement at the municipal building. The room smelled like polished wood and old paper. Investigator Hall asked questions like a surgeon making precise cuts. I kept my answers clean, exact, no speculation, just facts. When I left the building, a man in a gray sedan was waiting near the curb. I recognized him from the HOA meetings. He was always quiet, always sitting in the back row. He rolled down his window. "You didn't hear this from me," he said. But Cheryl had a second property, upstate, registered under a cousin's name. Guess who paid the utilities? I stared at him. "You got proof?" He handed me a thumb drive. Utility bills for the last year. HOA account number on everyone. I work in records for the power company. I recognized the name when I saw the investigation on the news. I didn't ask why he hadn't spoken up earlier. I knew the answer. Fear keeps people quiet, but facts make them brave. The audit committee met for the first time on Monday, Layla, myself, and a retired court clerk named Marvin. He'd lived in the neighborhood for 22 years and had a filing system that would make a librarian jealous. We were given access to the HOA's cloud account, paper archives, and treasury logs. Within 3 hours, we found the first concrete link. A payment to Golden Valley Property Solutions listed as emergency sidewalk repair. There were no work orders, no receipts, no photographs, and absolutely no sidewalk repairs on any street. The $4,700 transfer had been approved by Cheryl alone. Marvin leaned back in his chair. "That's money laundering," he said flatly. "She created a shell company, billed the HOA, and pocketed the cash. We found 5 more just like it. Different descriptions. Same recipient. Over the next 2 weeks, the committee uncovered over $60,000 in questionable disbursements. Some went to companies that didn't exist. Others to businesses where Cheryl's family members were listed as officers. But the worst one was buried in a folder labeled legal expenses. A payment of $10,000 to a law firm in another state. When we called, they said they'd never heard of the HOA or Cheryl. That's when the police got involved. 2 detectives arrived at the next board meeting, plainclothes, quiet, sitting near the side exit. No one knew who they were until Cheryl walked in through the back entrance, bold as brass, wearing sunglasses and a blazer like she was walking into a courtroom instead of a community center. She still had supporters. 3 board members nodded at her. A few residents even clapped softly. That stopped when the detective stood up and announced the arrest. "Cheryl Langley, you are under investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of fiduciary authority under the Homeowners Association Act." The room froze. She didn't argue, didn't say a word. Just turned to one of the remaining board members and said, "You better get a lawyer." They walked her out in handcuffs. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than that, like a door finally closing after years of cold wind. After the arrest, Layla called an emergency meeting. No blazers, no fancy binders. She came in jeans and a t-shirt, the way normal people do when they're not trying to sell anything. "We owe this neighborhood the truth," she said. "Every document is being scanned and uploaded to a public drive. Every policy will be rewritten with resident input. No more closed-door votes. No more rubber stamps." Someone raised their hand. "What about the money? We're working with the DA to freeze Cheryl's assets. If we recover any funds, they'll go toward community improvements, decided by resident vote." Another hand. "What about the other board members? They'll face the same scrutiny Cheryl did. If they knew, they'll be charged. If they didn't, they'll explain how they missed it." I didn't say anything, just watched the room. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak. They weren't whispering. They were angry, determined. Awake. After the meeting, Joel caught up with me in the parking lot. "Never thought I'd see it," he said. "Not in this neighborhood." "Me neither," I said, "but it's not over. Not until we fix everything she broke, he nodded. You sticking around for the long haul? I looked back at the community center, lights still burning inside. Yeah, I said. I think I will. The sign in my window stayed up for one more week. Then I took it down, not because I stopped watching, but because now so was everyone else. The first sign that things were truly changing came when the HOA newsletter arrived folded, printed in black and white, and signed not by a board member but by a local resident. It was honest. It was brief. And for the first time since I'd moved in, it didn't include a single veiled threat about community standards or mandatory compliance. Instead, it invited everyone to a town hall, no agenda, no closed-door votes. Just one big question: where do we go from here? I showed up early and helped set up chairs. The rec center smelled like coffee and copy paper. Marvin brought a stack of binders thick with everything we'd uncovered, not for intimidation, but transparency. Layla walked in with a USB drive and plugged it into the overhead projector. When people began arriving, it wasn't the usual group. It was younger families, older couples, renters and owners alike. Some had never attended a single meeting, but tonight they came. Layla stood at the front and didn't wait for silence. We're not pretending things are fine anymore, she began. We're not here to defend what happened. We're here to face it and decide what comes next. She clicked the projector. A spreadsheet appeared, clean columns and rows. At the top, recovered transactions. She didn't explain each one. She didn't have to. The numbers spoke for themselves. We've submitted this to the DA, and a civil suit is being prepared against Trevor Langley and 2 former board members. The forensic accountant told us that the money funneled out of the HOA over the last 4 years could have paid for a new playground, road resurfacing, and a full security system for the park. A woman in the second row, holding a toddler on her hip, raised her hand. Will we ever get any of it back? Layla didn't sugarcoat it. Some of it maybe, depends on what's recovered during the asset seizure, but not all. The toddler burbled something, oblivious. The room stayed quiet. I stood and faced the rest of them. Then we make sure no one ever gets that chance again. That's when I laid out the proposal. Not just new bylaws, a new structure. A rotating board made up of residents selected by lottery, serving no more than 1 year. All financial records posted monthly in a public drive. An independent oversight panel elected every spring with subpoena power for HOA files. And no more fines without documented evidence and majority vote. There were questions. Pushback. One man in the back asked whether all this would make us look weak to buyers. A woman next to him answered before I could. Nothing weak about honesty. The vote passed, unanimously. Within days, the changes began. The board dissolved itself. A third-party mediator guided the transition. The first lottery was held under the supervision of a notary. Joel was selected. So was Alina. And a young guy named Marcus, who'd only lived here 4 months, a software engineer who ended up designing the new online portal for resident oversight. A week later, I was on my porch when a police cruiser quietly pulled into the cul-de-sac. 2 officers stepped out along with Investigator Hall. They weren't here for show. They were here to serve a warrant, but not at Cheryl's old house, at the home of a former treasurer. He was still active in the neighborhood. No one had suspected him, because he kept his head down and always deferred to Cheryl in public. Turns out, he'd been laundering HOA funds through a fake maintenance supplier, a tiny LLC registered to a P.O. box in a town half an hour away. He'd set it up himself. The arrest was silent. No cuffs in front of neighbors, but Hall looked at me as he walked past. You started something here, he said. Most of these cases never get this far, I nodded. People just needed to see it wasn't impossible. The following Saturday, the community held a cleanup day not because they had to, but because someone suggested it, and 30 people showed up. I repainted the park bench Cheryl had once tried to fine me over for being unsightly adjacent. It's now bright green with a plaque that reads, "This space belongs to all of us." Later that week, I got a call from a reporter. Word had gotten out a neighborhood that overthrew its own corrupted HOA, documented everything, and restructured from the ground up. She asked if I'd go on record. I didn't give her a quote. I gave her the contact info for the audit committee and told her to talk to everyone. No one voice should define what happened here. Truth is, I never wanted to be the guy with the sign. I never wanted the attention. I just wanted to live in a place where your driveway was your own and your neighbors didn't need permission slips to plant sunflowers. But sometimes, all it takes is one well-timed sign and a little resolve to remind people they're not powerless. As summer came around, the streets started to look different. Not because of new paint or landscaping, but because people had started waving again. Kids rode bikes past houses that no longer hid behind hedges. Flags came down. Porch lights stayed on longer. One evening, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just a note that said, "I almost sold my house because of what they were doing. You stopped it. Thank you." I kept it in the drawer with the rest of my paperwork, but I never tried to find out who sent it. Didn't need to. Some stories don't need a name attached. As fall approached, I finally repainted my garage door, not because I had to, not because of a violation or a form. Because I wanted to. I chose a color no one had ever used before, something between slate and navy. A shade that didn't match a single other house on the block, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like home.